Alright, hello guys, how's it going? In today's video, we're going to be talking about that early January temperature pattern. We're also going to take a look at that snowstorm we've been talking about, which is looking more and more disappointing by every single model run. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Now, before I get started with this video though, I would ask that you do subscribe if you do like weather-related content, and also make sure to check out the links in the description for our social medias. Let's get right into things. Now, first off, we're looking at our watches, warnings, and advisories, and you can see hardly anything's going on. We have a lot of wind up there for Montana and Wyoming, even a blizzard warning, a ground blizzard warning there in portions of Wyoming. We also have a lot of flooding going on for the deep south, and then a little bit of some winter weather advisories there for Minnesota and South Dakota, and then up there for Oregon and Washington. But outside of that, not a lot going on whatsoever. Very, very quiet out there. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that snowstorm. Now, I would hope that everybody that watched yesterday's video would watch this video, but that's just not the reality of it. Not everybody's going to get to see this disclaimer. I made comments on that video, but there's still going to be people that still think that's what I'm calling for. This was what the European model showed yesterday morning, and this is what it shows as of this morning. And this just kind of goes to show the level of disappointment I have for the weather models. Recently, they just are not reliable whatsoever. There's plenty of cold, it's just the timing. It has it hitting earlier and earlier and earlier before the cold can even get in place, and that's why it looks this disappointing. Things switched. I'm embarrassed, personally, just based off of how bad this model is done. I'm just glad I hadn't made a forecast for this storm yet, but definitely not thinking this will be a New York to Boston snowstorm anymore. Matter of fact, it's moved hundreds of miles north by this point. Very disappointing, to say the least. Now, we're about to get into our temperature forecast. We're going to talk a little bit about how December's gone, and then we'll start talking about January. So here's December's pattern. This is the temperatures that we saw over the month of December. You can see this is a very, very warm look. Even warmer than I was predicting, but I was predicting warmth there in the east, particularly the southeast, and we definitely got that. So the forecast for December overall wasn't very bad whatsoever. We were calling for a bit of cold air in the very northern portions of the United States, and that hardly happened outside of some areas in New England and then into Albany. But besides that, there was less warmth in the north. So I guess it was kind of close, but it was pretty good for a monthly forecast. Typically, we do see some issues. There was definitely warmth in the southeast, and that's what we were calling for. Now, this draws a lot of questions. A lot of people are questioning my take on the winter because of this. And even though I do think that this probably will end up making the overall 3-month-long winter a little bit warmer on paper because of how warm December was, let's take a look at December of 2014 here. And you can see it was basically the same, except that December was warmer. Now, 2014 to 2015 was one of the best winters we've had in a long time. And they started out with a very warm December. It's very typical to start out with a very, very warm and snowless December. And then by the time you're late into January and all of the month of February can be extremely cold and have tons and tons of snow. So by no means is winter over yet. It is January 3rd and people are already panicking. I don't think it's over yet, and if it is over, we will let you know when it is, but definitely not yet. Now, we're about to talk about January and February of 2014 to 2015 because I wanted to show you guys how that winter ended up going, just to show that this doesn't mean winter is over. Now, before I do this, I do promise you we will talk more about January and the overall forecast for that. I realize I had a bunch of stuff that's all over the place in this video, but I had a lot I wanted to talk about, so hopefully you can just enjoy the video, even though it is a bit all over the place. Here was January this was 2015, so in the winter of 2014 to 2015, this was January, and you can see it was hardly cold in the east. It was a little bit cold there for the south central United States and then the northeast, but hardly, and definitely this is possible for this January. It was very warm in the beginning of that January, and then it started really cooling down towards the end, and then here's February of 2015, and you could see it was just absolutely brutal cold once we reached February. So this just goes to show this winter is not over until you're in the second half of February and nothing's happened. If nothing's happened by the second half of February, you can basically write it off, but nowhere near before that, nowhere near January 3rd. Now, we're about to start talking about our forecast for this January, obviously. which is going to give us a much better look. We're going to look at 5-day increments here, and I think that's going to give us a really, really good idea of what we're looking at here, and hopefully it clears up the picture for you guys. I think there's a good chance for cold towards the later 3rd of January, but before that, it's looking very, very mild. There could be some cold and a little bit of snow, but nothing brutal or anything crazy before that point. Now, I do realize we are already at the 3rd of January, so we're going to go from the 5th through the 10th here. It's been warm overall for the first little bit of January, obviously. So from the 1st through the 5th, it was quite warm. Now, from the 5th through the 10th, you can see there's a lot of warm, particularly in the central United States and heading towards the more inland eastern regions of the United States. Along the coast in the southeast, it's actually looking a little bit colder than normal. I'm pretty skeptical if this will even happen along the coast. I think that we will end up being average at best. For the southwest, it's looking a little bit chilly, and then also for the northwest, but really just warm overall for the central and eastern United States. Let's move on to the 10th through the 15th, though, and you can see that southeast ridge really starts building in by this point. We see tons and tons of warmth for the southeast here. And then we see a lot of cold out there for the western United States, and this isn't going to be perfect on this model. I do think that we will have something pretty similar to this. Maybe not as much cold out in the west. We'll have to wait and see. But definitely the southeast ridge is looking very likely based on the teleconnections and all factors that we take into consideration. This is looking pretty darn realistic in my opinion. Now, from the 15th through the 20th, it's basically the same thing, just a little bit less certain on this model. We do see some warmth there for the southeast. The northeast, if you're in very, very far north New England, you could see some cold, but outside of that, it's looking quite warm. The western United States, though, still looking quite chilly, especially near the Canadian border where it's very, very cold, 17 to 30 degrees below average Fahrenheit there, so very, very cold temperatures there on this model. And again, that's getting further and further out, so we don't know if this will pan out exactly like this. But I think overall the trend for this entire month is a little bit of warmth there for the southeast at least, and then colder for the west, maybe a little bit of cold for New England, but really in the eastern United States, it's going to be far and few between with the cold. Now, from the 20th through the 25th, you can see things look a little bit more positive for cold and snow lovers. The southeast ridge there goes a little bit further south. We see that basically mostly for the deep south. And then we see the northeast and New England, especially the coastal regions, actually getting some cold in there by this point. Again, the further and further out we get, the less and less certain it is, but things do look a little bit more positive as we go on, just because the confidence in the warmer pattern lowers and lowers and lowers. You can see mostly the northern United States is the most below average, and then as you head further south, it's a bit warmer, and this is typically what goes with a zonal pattern, where things look a little bit more average. And that's definitely what we're looking at. There's a faster jet stream in the Pacific, and this leads to a lot more of a mild pattern. And I think that overall, most of January, that's going to really be the dominant factor. You can see the West Coast, it's a little bit cold in the southern portions, but not compared to the Northwest there, where we're looking at, again, 15 to maybe even 30 degrees below average. Then from the 26th through the 31st, here's the look. So as you can see, it actually starts to get better and better and better as we move on. And I guess that's the only good news here for cold and snow lovers, is it does look better as you go on further and further and further. So we do see some cold entering the central United States, even the south central United States, and then the mid-Atlantic and northeast finally looking a little bit cold. But again, it's so far out, we don't even know. Like, this is, the confidence just gets so low as we move on this far, especially with a just single model like the CFS. So definitely take it with a grain of salt, and especially with how the models have been. I know I started this video out complaining about the models, so definitely take it with a grain of salt, but the chance for cold increases as we head towards the later portion of January. I can say that with confidence. Now let's look at the overall 30-day CFS run forecast here. As you can see, we have, this is from the 4th of January through the 3rd of February. That's the best I could do. But we do have warmth there for the southeast, and then cold a little bit for the northeast, but I'm doubtful. And then for the north central United States through the west coast, we have some cold. Now, the interesting thing is this actually correlates quite nicely with my December forecast here, as I'm going to show that. This actually looks very, very similar. So far, my January forecast is looking very, very promising. Obviously, a lot of people have been complaining about how the winter forecast is done, and I would do the same. It does look quite similar on this January forecast. I called for the heart of the cold to be in Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And that's kind of how January is shaping up, but it's definitely a lot further north and less cold than what I was predicting in my winter forecast. And those are never perfect. The seasonal forecasts are the least, I'm the least confident in the seasonal forecast. I become more confident as we go to a monthly time frame, and then obviously way more confident on a weekly forecast, as our weekly forecasts are almost perfect. So the seasonal forecast, they're wrong sometimes and they're right sometimes. I had a lot of people complain about it, and obviously I'm not very happy with how it's gone, but we have had successes and we've had failures with those, and I'm going to continue doing them, but you always just have to take everything with a grain of salt, as I would always tell you. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.